So, first, a recap from last session in 5 minutes. And Pablo, do you want to start? We can switch and fill
Yeah,
each
I can
other's
I
omission.
can try. I can do my
Yeah.
best. I guess the first summary is that we took the idea of cards as an organizing principle to activate the idea of filters in a new format that is like manageable in a more direct way, not necessarily direct, but that allows for a world of analogies and metaphors that are useful in terms of cards, modularity, decks, spreads, tarot, different games you can play with cards, suits as a way of typifying certain cards. Like it's just a fruitful model to understand the filters and to play with them. So yeah, that's what we did.
Yeah, like the one thing maybe in a very short form, like how did we arrive there? Because I think it kind of how the arrival fed these new structures. It was this sort of like first of all there was a lot about like what are these sort of certain intriguing structures in tarot that are kind of have maybe way more potential than just what is thought in terms of tarot. Like for like uh, one thing, for example, is their inherent generative nature. Like it's not like when you look at the tarot card, it's supposed to almost remain a mystery, and you're digging not even maybe answers, but whether they're answers or not, you're kind of producing material out of it. But it's like producing from a machine that then never really ceases. It doesn't like here's my final product. And then secondly, they are inherently filters because they are often read against something like somebody's question or whatever it is, like person as a whole, which makes the card not just stand by itself, but actually be a filter to 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 the context where they're read. And so this was, and then there are cards, which are kind of like, oh, they are these modular pieces. I mean, you know about a lot because you had even the project earlier, which we kind of got to know, Mikael, your project around cards. So like, and we talked a lot about this modularity, which is like they can come in decks, they can be put in spreads, all of this. And then like maybe one more thing to mention from there is once we started to move towards this general potential of such forms, like if we kind of relinquish them from being uh, uh, tools to tell a fortune or even just being cards necessarily, we can think of them in any medium. We can think that a piece of text is a tarot card. It's just like we take the same attitude towards it, or even a real life scene on the street can be behaved like a tarot card if we start to give titles for it, which is something where we're very close to some of the operations things, ways we played earlier when we were putting titles on pictures, etc. And I don't think that's an accident. It was one of the reasons I think it was interesting to bring this topic. So all of that was kind of the background, which then created this idea that, okay, what if we, because we're dealing with this form that we have with like a poverty of riches, there's huge amount of potential forms it could take, and we have been talking about how could we present something of it, like a certain form to be played that would kind of not give people like, here's a grammar, you can produce anything with it, which is a very hard situation to approach. And this came to this idea that, okay, what about this sort of card form and taking all this sort of sense of tarot and this sort of generativity, but then this sort of all the ways we have played, like creating these cards and using them to build the organization, all these play forms kind of fit with that. So that all was kind of part of the context we were building. Any other things
Uh,
you would add, Pablo?
Yeah, one important thing to mention, I guess, is that we also thought about the cards as a potential way of accelerating us towards an output, a
Yeah.
XORG output of sorts, something that can be yeah, made public, shared, played, iterated upon. It allows you to like publish something small and add to it later in form of like expansions and such. So it has like that as a publishing format is also quite suitable.
Yeah, then yeah, this was important, and that was kind of towards the end, and we even kind of envisioned like how that opens up certain potential. Like one example was that we have many of these interesting concepts, for example, that have come through it. Like anomaly mining was one example, um, uh, and the normal way to think about it that okay, maybe we create a lexicon where there's like it's like a book of like where there's a concept and it's explained and forms this sort of like not like a dictionary but like a concept book in a way. But if like we think of them as cards, and if anomaly mining comes out as a card, I think of it in quotation marks to open it up a bit. It's suddenly it's kind of pushed that it can exist alone. That just that it doesn't need like that surrounding, but it can exist in a deck. Once again, maybe in a quotation marks, and then it can be playable. Potentially, there can be different forms. So it makes the both kind of bringing these out maybe easier. Like you could make just a card for anomaly mining. How would that card be? Then you create another card. How does it play with that card? And all of that opens up flexibility and like more spread, more wider range of potential. Like so that was I think a good concretization of this as well. And there were a lot of other things, of course, but wouldn't make sense to talk all of it through because that then would be the whole session. Um, but and well, one thing was that we also talked about that we could even start by just creating like starting to sketch out one card, maybe two cards, and see how they look, and then what they suggest, and how that takes things forward. Or card ideas, like maybe not even finishing one cards, but trying like several card ideas, but then let the cards tell us in a very theoretic way. Cards tell us like what kind of forms they would like to be in, what kind of forms they could be. Yeah, so that's maybe. But any questions, Mika?
Well, I really like the way you kind of motivated the why to use cards as filters, and I really like the idea because cards are kind of they are easy to kind of think about them as a kind of how to say structured system or something like that, as kind of kind of mm, uh, easy to start thinking like how they could relate to each other, or what makes one card or so on. So I'm
Mhm.
pretty excited to get to play them out. Yeah.
And as kind of like ingredients um, on the table, I threw in one idea, which is not to let's make these cards, but it was just like maybe something that wasn't first in the mind, so it kind of maybe opens up this card idea a bit. And they are here in the. You see that there is this picture of spreads. We can talk about that later, um, which I loaned from uh, game for Glassbead games. But then there are these two cards, quotation marks underneath that. one is the template, and the one is kind of like, here's where I started to fill up this template. Or do you get so I started thinking about, like, I was looking at certain game structures that were interesting, and one thing I found was like an interesting, like, I started to hack with certain rules and found an interesting way to approach a role. Uh, and then I thought like how it would fit here, and I was like, well, if you make a card that is kind of like, to play that card is to make a role, maybe an instance of a role. Like there could be a version of this that is more filled, and you fill a little bit. All the square brackets are kind of filling slots, by the way. Um, so there could be a card that is a little bit more filled, or uh, this sort of open card in itself. But the idea was like, okay, so this is sort of semi-stolen from several games, but like one way to make a role, which could be even you could even make a traditional role with this, like graphic designer, or a game role. Like both could work with this model. And actually, it would be quite interesting to make a graphic designer by this. Maybe I'll try that, or something. So the role and the brackets there, it's just a title for the role, like whatever you give it. But then it's kind of like you fill these certain things. Some of you fill actually during play, um, and some of you feel like before play, and that they set you certain possibilities. But there was this idea that you set yourself a certain theme, which is like a lingering element of the past, and then you post some signs of it. So, um, so let's try to move to the card that is partially filled on the right. So I could put like um, uh, the lingering element from the past could be a certain kind of question. It could be like something that I hold, like something that I'm probably not going to solve, but always informs my actions in this role. So that could be, for example, uh, uh, could be anything. Finding questions beneath, and this can be not poetic, but like non-informal, descriptive, impressionistic, um, non-questions. So this, now I'm setting this for this role as something like in canvas, like underlying paint, and that it's not often like foreground, but it's always there. And then signs of this could be uh, uh, like, let's put it, unnecessary. Let's put that in quotation marks to not to make it negative. Unnecessary. This is for thought. That could be one sign, just as an example. So now I put that intentionally as something that maybe one can see, or also enact, like make it, like. So now this already kind of puts something in the role itself, like there is this theme, but then the identities, I put one in, like these are kind of like almost like vocations in wider sense of vocations, that they don't have to be jobs. Like could be like, I put in visualizer, sees sees things in their mind's eye, like and this is like almost like, if the earlier thing was like this canvas background, these are large colors on the painting, like large areas of color, like if you you can think of it practically like a history of jobs, or history of areas one has worked in, or operated in. Um, so I could put here, make a word, play fire. It's a horrible word, but hopefully you know, like discovers play under non-play. Not maybe the best examples, but you probably know sort of what that is getting. So if I would fill like these three identities, they would be all almost like this sort of things I can pull in. And then the third one is drive, which is like to do X in order to achieve Y. So in a way, like it could be thought like a meta action and a meta goal. Like what this could be, for example, give form that create a form that generates new forms. In order to, let's put this very blandly, find something new. And of course I could update it, but that's my excuse for the bland examples. But this is already kind of filling up, like now it's like, yes, the role can be a title, but with this, it becomes kind of more playable. There's more playing pieces. And then very quickly I put like that there's these powers, which could be a palette that is always available. And it's kind of like things that you can really do, but usually don't do without a good reason, like mutate. So I can always mutate something. I can stop, I have the power to mutate. Like I'm looking at, say, this card, and I could mutate it to something else, or pose a challenge, or whatever it could be. There could be several of these. But it's kind of like turning certain things that you can do into things that you probably will do more because you made them into powers. And finally, there is this, or not finally, but there is this questions, which is kind of like thought to be like traveling along the way or play. So when you're playing the role, you can always come to some question like, what was my first discovery, or discovery in general? And then during the play, I actually discovered this, so you answer that question. Or you could ask that question from somebody else, like, what have you discovered? So the questions actually kind of travel along the play itself. And then tokens are kind of like mementos. Like whenever I really find something that I want to keep, I make it into a token, but the token here, it would be a description, like for example, what would be the one sentence form I would give to a thing I want to remember. So I collect tokens also along the way, along the play. So anyway, but then all of that said, like this is then a card, and of course the template of it is a card as well. But I thought that it's an interesting example, not that every card has to be this operative, applying, but it's also an example of how they can be. Any thoughts, any comments?
I'm curious or interested in this figure of the meta card, sort of like this, as you explained, like a card that has slots that generates other cards, like it's a form of types, I guess, like it pushes you towards making types. I'm wondering what's the space of these cards. Are these like a particular type of card, the meta card that generates other cards, or are all cards always containing a meta layer where they can be expanded and modified?
I think, are you still there? Like you were cutting off at the end, but I think you finished.
I am
like,
here, yeah.
Yeah, good. Like this is the one another good thing about tarot, and why it's such an interesting comparison, is when somebody reads a tarot, they make a new card out of that card, because it's always their own reading. Like, it doesn't become concretely a new card, but actually when they see a card, they see their own card. They don't see, like, so what's happening here is almost just a physicalization or concretization of a phenomena that is unavoidable in tarot, uh, and unavoidable in a kind of generated card. And so I don't think it's necessarily a different category. I mean, one can make it such, but like, I think it's more, what comes to first to my mind is that it's an underlining or highlighting a quality that is already there, but it's just giving it kind of like, since it's already there, why not play with it, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, it's also powerful in terms of opening up the space of play towards first a meta level, defining the stuff that you're gonna play with. I'm not sure if we want to formalize it as an initial stage or if this should happen anytime, but I like the idea of this, of the slots and the cards with empty spaces.
Yeah, and it's also like, you can think like this kind of card, if we then compare them to kind of the cards we were playing earlier, which we can now kind of see as cards, like with this new thoughts overlaid upon them. Like, first of all, that kind of a roll card could come here, and it could be put on the side, like on a game board, which is kind of a scene, and say like, I can always take this roll and use that roll to travel in this map. And it wouldn't be far off. It would be actually kind of almost like normal board game language that I like. Even in a normal board game, you might first take a card that is a roll, and then you start moving your piece uh, along the map, but that's actually representing that roll now. So similarly, this kind of a role could be played alongside other structures made out of the cards themselves.
Yeah, I I found that example card also kind of very fascinating. It's interesting that that the card in itself kind of contains it contains mechanics in a sense, in a sense that there are things happening, kind of almost like things happening inside the card, not just like that you have the board and the game out there, and then the card is something that you kind of throw there, and and only then it does something. But it kind of it contains elements kind of that are normally part of either the game board or then part of the, let's say, character sheet or something like that. For instance, like this collecting these tokens, and also like kind of writing down these discoveries and underlying mysteries and things like that. And I find it very interesting. Or other way to look at it, like these cards, they have kind of or copies of cards, they have a kind of leveling up system in a sense. You can collect like more information there, and kind of in the form of tokens and all that. And that's kind of the cards keep evolving in that sense. Also, of course, along with your understanding of the cards and how they might function.
Yeah, and it's also an area that has, like, one can make a comparison to say Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
If it, like Magic the Gathering, like it's not the first one, but it very much played with this idea that the mechanics are coming in the cards, and also like along the way it also developed this like cards even kind of collect their own tokens even, and things like this, and that actually is one of the reasons why it is so flexible as a form, like why it's able to be so deep in its possibilities, because then the kind of board, so to speak, that you're playing is always changing because you're bringing the mechanics by the cards, and the board becomes this on a dynamic space of what's at play. So that's one comparison, which is then kind of highly influential. I mean, came from other games as well, but that direction is highly influential in terms of board game design, certainly like in the last few decades. And it's very much kind of playing to that, but there is like I could still make the comparison to tarot as well, like in a way, like when you're reading the tarot, in a way that there is this image and there are these meanings connected to the image, while not strictly rules, they are a configuration. They behave a bit like rules. It's like, oh, I got the hermit card, and it is holding a lantern, if it happens to be one of the hermits holding a lantern. So it's still behaving for me. It's like these things are set in somehow. Like they can be soft rules, like you can kind of like look past the lantern, like. But the same applies here. Maybe you can think of these as soft rules, and you look past the tokens, for example. You don't really use them. So like I find it fascinating that this connection still stay surprisingly strong in terms of what actually happens and what happens, because the tarot card is this, like you cannot be passive with it. I don't think a normal reader is passive either, but like in front of a tarot card, it's a much more accentuated like activation, and therefore you kind of become a player, and therefore the card kind of becomes the rules, and ultimately your behavior is kind of similar. Like there are differences as well, but like on kind of like broad perspective, there are kind of similar patterns of taking the cards given as rules that I play with. Um, And of course, these correlations are, I think, a good thing, because they're pointing out like how all this area is already open to this kind of direction.
It's actually now that I kind of think of tarots, they also feel little like mirrors in a sense.
Yeah.
But what it actually does is that that depending on the some mirrors might be covered with spider webs, some mirrors might be blackened out by the ash or something, and whatever, but all these like things are essentially like and of course what do you see on the background, and what is the lighting and so on, but all these like elements are actually little like filters in the sense they affect the context and the way you see yourself in the surroundings of the question or you are asking, or the life you are living, or so on.
It's nice that you make that comparison. Like one of my older, when I got interested in this meaning structure of tarots, one of my early metaphors for them was funhouse mirrors. You know, funhouse mirrors, which each has a shape, and then you become you but different, depending on what the mirror is. And like precisely the funhouse part of it being this sort of everyone is a different filter quality in itself. But I do agree very much that there is this sort of mirroring, and even your mood and like all of this kind of comes affected affecting the situation itself, like certainly in tarot cards, but even what do you see in the mirror? Do you look at your blemishes, or do you look at your shiny countenance, or whatever it is you find in the mirror image? So I think it's a powerful metaphor, this sort of mirror, looking at the mirrorness of it and how it's filtering you. But yeah, that's an area in itself, like that I wanted to highlight, because it opens like possibilities in itself, like this sort of, and you can do a lot with these sort of simple rules. I like I found this way of tackling a role, playing around with it, quite useful. Of course, there are infinite ways to do that, but that was just an interesting possibility. The other, those inspiratory material, and these are game boards, by the way, but the main, I wanted to much more shortly, just to open up with this idea of spread, and kind of expanding that to the idea of like a constellation. So that, in a way, like how cards are placed, in a way the dungeon is a dynamic constellation, like the things we were playing earlier, like forming these passageways, which forms a kind of a graph, is kind of like these things as well. So it can be thought of as a way of making a card spread. So it's both similar to creating this card spread idea, and card spreads have these different themes, like the card above is your past, or it's your thoughts, and card below is your means, or it's your future, things like this. So there is already this idea in a card spread, but then thinking of them slightly more openly as this sort of constellations, which is not just about the position, but meaning of the positions. So I wanted to bring that idea just to as a possibility.
This configuration of the spreads, like I'm interested also in, now if we're dealing with cards, how positions can filter the cards, or can define the relationships in which the cards filter each other. Like I see a lot of potential in in spreads as layouts of relations between the filtering capabilities, and the potential of that to assemble a scene, or even like a scene would be a good example, I guess.
Yeah, and how the funhouse mirrors mirror each other when they form a constellation. The mirror metaphor fits this as well, like as one way to think about it, because of course they do. Like you will see, if you go in the middle of a constellation of mirrors, you will see yourself reflected, and partly the picture is built out because the mirrors reflect each other's, and their angles and shapes matter in terms of what they're reflecting from each other.
This is very interesting, that if there are angles and kind of relations between mirrors or cards, then that means that the space is also important somehow.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely is. Like and also like the meaning of the space, which is interesting. Actually, for me, Carl, this is meaningful. Maybe for Pablo, it's harder. Like the English word funhouse mirrors a little bit always bothers me, because in Finnish there is this, in Linnanmäki, which is the main amusement park in Helsinki, there used to be this peilitalo, which was the funhouse mirror's house. So it means mirror house. And I think it was, in all its simplicity, a nice name for it. that made it easier to think, and funhouse mirrors always seemed a little bit more flatter way of thinking about it. But yeah, that's but that's just, yeah, that's material, that's ingredients on the table, but we don't have to kind of cook with those ingredients, or we can take parts of it.
I think it is important to already think of spreads as a potential scene generator. And for example, I'm thinking here you have multiple ways of spreading cards. So if each spread is a scene, I would see this cluster of spreads maybe as a setting,
Yes.
like a network of scenes.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, just in terms of how things are made public, it allows for yeah, expansion in a modular way as well.
That kind of what Pablo said, that kind of seems to suggest for me that that when looking at these different configurations here that we see now, it would be very interesting that when we are starting to build, when we select a setting, we actually select kind of one of these like formations, and then when we kind of select or play cards, we actually lay them down into that specific configuration. We fill out one spot, and then we move to fill out the next spot, and really, but not all the possible configurations, not all the possible ways of arranging are never like available at the same time, but like and one setting kind of ends when all the places are filled. It's kind of just seems to suggest that sort of like logic.
Yeah, actually, you're almost figuring out like how these boards were used, because that was one of the reasons I brought them in, is because you probably noticed that there are these numbers there, but there's nothing else, like compared to, say, tarot spreads where each position is predetermined, like this is the past and whatever. Like here, there are just numbers. But the idea, so these are from a game that is kind of like a practical version of the glass bead game, by from like extracted from the vague allusions of Hermann Hesse's book, and made by Hip Bone Games. But it has this interesting structure, which is kind of interesting along the kind of thoughts you both were presenting, is that the reason that there are these numbers is that, and there's always zero in the beginning, is like before you start playing, like to set up the board, you fill the zero. And in this, you can fill it with anything. Like it could be, it's often like there is some words like a title, maybe one phrase, but that could refer to an image, or it could even be an image or something else. But then the idea of why there are all these connections is that, say I play, let's use this board, if you it's the bottom center, like, which has a lot of different kind of connections. So so there is the zero played, and this could be some meaning, like a card, essentially, like and when I would play the one, another card, I would have to explain the connections that already are taking upon it. So now I have to improvise. I'll make something super simple. Like, let's say the zero is a watcher bird. And when we start the play, we have agreed that it's this board and there's just the word watcher bird, or maybe there's an image to it. Maybe there's a little bit more, but whatever. I played the one, and I could play, say, a stone smoothed by water. Once again, here the text can be a tarot card. Like I could make an image for it, but even that text itself can function like a tarot card. Like Like I'm concentrating on the stone part, I'm concentrating on the water part, the smoothing part. It's kind of like reading a tarot card, really. I'm just using the text as a basis. But the one thing I would have to do is to explain the relation to all the cards that are already there and have a relation to it. So now I would have to explain, like, to my stone smoothed by water, the water bird, is that maybe I would explain here that the water bird has that there is a similarity to the relation of a water bird and the stone smoothed by water, that which is a kind of dependency, and it's also reflected in the shape. The shape of the water bird is shaped by the water. Birds that live in water are different shapes than other birds, and similarly that the stone is shaped by water. And in both cases, the effect is happening by time. And then when I would play the two, I would have to, whatever I played there, explain the connections. In this case, it would be both 1 and 0, but I would kind of have to explain them to the 1 in both ways, like how 1 is affecting the 2 and how 2 is affecting the 1. So in this sense, like, it's self-building spread. Like, you don't need the previous, you don't need the titles beforehand, because like the places make the titles, and then the configuration becomes the meaning itself. So I think what you were saying was sort of already tracing this quality, which I thought was interesting to bring into play in terms of these constellations.
Yes, that feels very interesting and also like generative. And I really like the fact that there are so many different these diagrams to kind of play with. It's really productive system, I guess.
Yeah, and of course you can always add more. Like, the simplicity is good, but you could set, like, I mean, they've already set more by saying that you have to, by play, explain the relations that are happening to the existing cards. That's kind of more, the lines are just communicating that, but there could be something else there as well, like, and it would be a different board if you would write something on the lines again. So all of these open up possibilities, but even in its simplicity, it's kind of like quite functional.
I am curious about the potential of having these spread diagrams, these structures, also be contained in cards. I mean, as a way of utilizing them and, like, yeah, having access to them, but also as a way of nesting structures within one another. Maybe that could be interesting. Or do you think they should exist as a different element, as a board or so?
I think the nesting is always possible, and this is what I wanted to say on the, when you said that the board is a setting, and I would say it can be, and then these cards are the scenes, and I would say it can be, because it ultimately, if these terms like the setting and scene are more perspectives, it's the matter of how you're looking at it. Like, everything is potentially a scene or a setting, but it's then a question, is it fertile to look at it that way? So if this is a whole game board, it's kind of a scene as well. Like, if you're moving back and looking how everything is affecting everything, then that's your scene. Then the whole board is your scene. But if you're concentrating and thinking about your card in one position, well, then that's your scene, and then the board is kind of a setting around it. And why I say this is, this of course connects to the nesting, that it makes nesting kind of natural. Like, in a setting, everything nests in everything. And like, practically you could think like that in this kind of a spread constellation, position 1 could be a whole board. Like, let's say we had played the board on the bottom right, like right next to it, and then we would place that to 1. That's possible. I'm not saying it's the sensible way, and it becomes a quite deep structure by itself, but certainly you can think in that manner. And also, like, if the cards, like the roll example, or the kind of rooms we made, if one places a room like card like this into position 1, there is a kind of a nesting happening there, but nothing really prevents that. Like it comes naturally if one thinks in terms of these perspectives, which is maybe like it's a different mindset than the, let's say, the conventional thinking is, but it's rather powerful, I think, in terms of its capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, it's consequential with the XORGian perspectivist
Yeah,
mode. And I'm also like, I'm imagining it being very fertile in terms of you decide how to play the card as. Like, I play
yeah,
this card as a role, I
yeah,
play this card as a setting, and
yeah,
you can, depending on the context, choose that, right? Like
yeah.
anomaly
That's the type.
mining, yeah, exactly, can be presented as a role or can be
Mm,
presented as a setting, even as a scene.
yeah,
Yeah, I think that's really powerful.
yeah, and that's precisely why the type is there, and it's also a different kind of nesting. If you say I played as a role, then you connect it to all the other roles or person's conceptions of what roles are together, like the family of roles. Family in the sense of the connection between them, like uh, whether it's like we have made 10 roles or whether it's just like our sense of what a role is from our past, it comes to be nested in that, like when we say I play this as a role. And so in this sense, like this sort of being able to make a type is powerful because it allows for a different kind of reference um, that can be very soft. And like this is also interesting because it's combining one could something that one could think of as hard systems. You know, everything is explicitly laid out and so on, but it's also incorporating soft systems. Like if somebody says I'm playing this as a role, you can the others can play with it if it's just their impression sense of the concept of the role, which is more soft system playing, so to speak. But I do think like actually being able to utilize both, um, like maybe in some cases you make everything hard if you want, or you make everything soft, but it often like there are some interesting combinations of those two. And I think that all is like inherited from this sort of perspectivist approach, and why there is a kind of different kind of thinking space, but also a different kind of representation space, different kind of process space and representation space that is opening up here. Like it has this sort of strengths that are rarely used because usually things are not approached in this kind of manner.
My brain's just jammed because I just got a kind of side association that that this this would also, this sort of like diagrams would also be a very interesting way to build or rethink decks of cards, kind
Yeah.
of what is a deck beyond kind of system for randomness or so on.
Yeah, exactly. That's an interesting idea. You just played it as a type of a deck. You take the diagram and you said, what if I approach this as a type of a deck? But that's
Yeah.
precisely true. Now that you said that, it made me think like, yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Because it's like deck has some organization, like it has 7 cards. That's already organization. some decks are actually more ordered than others. Others are always kind of shuffled randomly, but some are like there are these always this one card at the top, and then the rest are shuffled or whatever. So they are already playing with organization, but then this would be a different way of thinking about their organization itself. Like, you know, like what if the deck is like what if it's laying out this sort of like of course it can create order in terms of what they come, but also like it can build relations and affections then inside the deck. Uh, like this card has these relations to this and this card, for example, always because that's how it's in the deck itself. Yeah, it's an interesting direction. But as usual, we have managed, and I blame also a lot of that on myself, to open a lot of possibilities, which is good. Um, but in a sense, I'd like to also kind of curtail from that. Like even thinking about it, um, like if we just create not random, but somehow like fairly simple cards. Somebody brings up even a picture. Somebody writes text and says, I'm thinking of this as a tarot card. And it might be a pro story or a description. And somebody makes some rules, like say this roll or something similar, and brings this as a card. Or somebody writes a description of anomaly mining and then thinks of it as a card, changes it a bit to somehow make it more playable, and then brings it in, and then we start playing with it. We are already progressing if we do that. Like there is like the doorway or the traveling from here is not too hard. Like it's, and I do think like in some ways that makes sense. Like something like that, this sort of like starting to travel, something like that, because I think we'll learn through playing of these kind of uses. Like if we start kind of making these things, even if we think that they're not perfect or we have no clue if they even really kind of work well, but then kind of like bring them, and then what if we play them in this kind of constellation? Uh, what if we use that as the deck, and we will discover interesting connections, which we can then kind of in a way mark down, and by marking those things down, uh, there will appear forms of play that are kind of communicatable, shareable to people.
Pekka, one question. Beyond cards that are roles, do you have ideas what other type of cards there might be?
Well, my answer, of course, would be anything. Like, but no, like I would like one reason I wanted to bring the type of a role, was, well, first because I had some interesting material on there, like this sort of simple, interesting role form. But it was also kind of bringing these forms that will come to play, like or like role is, you don't always need it, but it's kind of like very useful thing, very useful type. But you could have like really anything else, like here in the earlier example, these were kind of cards, these rooms, but here there were more rooms, and then this idea that we can think of them as almost like real rooms, like images, like certain texts are also like placed like furniture, but nothing really prevents that to be a room itself. Um, or it could be that the card is uh, a scene, or maybe more practically, like a game board, which is very much a scene in some ways. Like in the sense that scene is the active context. It's the, if I'm thinking of something as a scene, is I'm thinking of like what is my everything affecting everything contour. Like there are things beyond it, of course, but I cannot think everything in the world. What is where I want to think everything affecting everything, and A good example of this is a chess player thinking of the chessboard. Even if they're moving pieces, they are thinking everything on that board. That's very much like a scene. So one card could be like say this board or one of these or some other, and then that could even hybrid that comes with certain rules. Like for example, that there would be the short writing of like place a card like sequentially, like telling the rule, and whenever you place a card, describe all the connections that it has for existing placements, and that could be a card in itself.
Yeah, in a sense, you wouldn't need the visual image if you would so decide kind of when kind of playing card or whatever element. You could also kind of describe its relation to other cards that are already in the game, or those that you want, and those you then kind of describe the relation to, then they gain this vector also between them.
Yeah, definitely. Like to give an example, like you could even, if you would start from say a traditional organization, you could start that you make their main coffee room where everybody meets into a card, and in some ways it's the room itself. Like it's like you could even go and look at the room like a card and look at people moving there and how it's constantly modulating its existence, but that could be a card. But of course you could say take a picture of it in order to place it somewhere, but you would take the picture with the knowledge that it's not just a picture. The picture is just a tool, uh, but it's a useful tool in itself. You can look at the picture and that tells something about the room, and you can play with just that picture. But it's still kind of like reverse. It has the thread that runs into the room itself, and now the room is a card. Like we could play our Zoom room. If we think of this as Zoom room as a card, and we could play a game of XORG where we would make a tarot card like thing out of our Zoom room and start to give it qualities. Maybe trying to document it, maybe trying to give new qualities to it, who knows? And that then could enter a play. Say a game where we place the Zoom room, and then let's say we place versions of ourselves as cards, but not quite like just my name or your name or Pablo's name, but like maybe our own descriptions of it, and then we explain our relations with that, uh, like each other and the room, and that could be a game that actually generates meaning and probably ideas of how to think about things differently, opens up new possibilities. And that's just like of course, spur of the moment improvisation, but just to give a concrete example of that flexibility of what is the contents of the card.
I'm thinking of how maybe this relates also to the visual identity exploration and sort of like the rejecting unifying aesthetic as a as a way of engaging with multiplicity, and how each card could have its own mechanics or its own format, its own structure that does not necessarily relate to other cards, as if it was a deck built out of cards from multiple games or multiple universes. Could be interesting to really commit to the diverse forms of representation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I, I think I think it opens up certain power that otherwise isn't there. Uh, this opening of representation, and even this sort of like like the example of that the room is the card, but then you take a picture of it to bring that room somewhere else, but you still maintain a thread. Um, and if you say play it with people who have been in that room, like us in this Zoom room, for example, or the people having been in the coffee room, they're kind of bringing in the whole coffee room memories and thoughts and into the play itself. Like I think that is in itself powerful. This possibility. But I think like I think there is like these directions. Like obviously there is this like creating different kinds of cards or sketches of cards, like any kinds, like even just like here's one image, or here's like some rules or whatever it is, like, and then starting to experiment with them. They can also be cards that are, yeah, like a concept, or but then like giving oneself the freedom to experiment. What does it mean that it's not just like an entry in a lexicon or dictionary, but it's now on a card. Um, and what can you do with it now that it's kind of filter like in nature? It's not like all the definition and description of this concept is here, and the next one tells about the next one. But it's actually kind of actively creating a playing piece by its description, and what happens when this, even if it's a traditional definition, how it changes when it comes to play itself. Like, and I think that's highly interesting because that opens up this sort of, like, it expands on how we traditionally or conventionally think about meaning in itself, of things, even these lofty things like abstract concepts or concrete concepts as well, but both, that if they are suddenly thought of, like, they can be playing pieces and that they can enter into uh, essentially as many games than they are designed, which is like a practical infinity. Um,
I just started thinking that if each of us would have this sort of like role cards, and we would play with them, kind of. Those would be our kind of individual or
mm,
some shared with some logic or whatever. But then what if the game would be so that we set an empty card in the middle of the game board, and the game is to, or a scene is to design a new card using this our
mm,
role cards in order to play more cards out, any type of cards, and kind of also while designing this, not all the information of course would end up being written in the new card to be designed, but much of the kind of silent knowledge would be accumulated in those role cards, because
mm.
there are these token spots and all that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to play, and we could give like the freedom of maybe the rule, the offset is like everybody has a role card, but they're kind of free to define the role card. Like they don't have to have inside same rules. Like somebody's is very impressionistic and contains maybe many pictures. Somebody is very rules based. I think it can still work, and maybe that's actually more interesting, that people come with different approaches and makes it maybe easier to produce them. Uh, like uh, like of course, if somebody wants to follow the same model as somebody else, they can. Like that's completely possible. But that could be like a a good way, and then that becomes the design of a card. Like I can already see that that can create. Like I thought that I would actually create first like a very simple role, um, like I was thinking like taking a role that is kind of pushing material in intentionally taking that kind of an operation and making a version of myself that is pushing more material in and making a role out of that into that game and seeing what happens.
It feels very good, good kind of in a in a kind of feeling way that while we are kind of collaboratively kind of playing out a new card, at the same time these role cards, the way you have designed them, they are evolving
Yes.
themselves as well.
Yeah, the one thing that doesn't really read there, but really should, is this is not the role. Like, it's not the role type, it's an A type. Like, there can be a completely different way of making a role, which is, of course, what happens in games already. Like, every game usually designs their own take on what the role is to make partly the game. But it's also useful to say a type, because it's then saying others, like, it's also a template for you. Like, you can, what's the word, inherit or adopt, like, some as much of the structures as you want, which is another strength. Like, you can change or inherit or adopt. But I had in my mind, like, I'm doing a very simple card here, which has there should be probably something else, but I'll just put roll and I make it, what's the word, brash. That's all I have for now for my role. Brash impressionist. And then maybe I add, oops, this is now my expression about role. It has one, expresses first, thinks after. So this, for example, could be a role that I play in the kind of a game that Mikael was proposing. So because, I mean, I could make it all the way through the model, but now I already have the role, and for the quickness sake, that might be useful. I was also thinking, yeah, maybe I'll stop sharing. I was thinking that I add an image to it just for the sake of testing things. But then I have to all right. So I'm making a card. I'm also inviting anybody who wants to. I'm making it with the possibility of joining Mikael's game. But we could do something else. But this is kind of because I'm already kind of playing this brash impressionist. I'm following. I'm starting to do before I think about it. I think this role is playable. I could add more to it.
The image is so nice.
Yeah, this was kind of like I changed it to expressionist from impressionist. I think it was more fitting since I made it there. And this is the Jakob Steinhardt, The City, 1913. Is the painting, which was just actually found by. I searched for expressionist and city. I don't know why I was thinking somehow city. I wanted something that has this sort of constellation-y everything on top of each other kind of thing. So that's how I found it.
Whoa.
But 1913, that is surprising for me that it's that early. Really? Yes, 1913. So, okay, let me go back to once I have the controls. Sharing screen. So, who is Broken Sieve and who is Lost Explorer?
I made the broken sea.
Yeah, I'm the last one.
I mean, we can even start with this like as a mere symbol. I could put the empty card somewhere here. It doesn't have to follow this shape, just to have something to think about it. So this empty thing here, let's make it so. Yes. Do we want to set any other rules ops, or is it that's the setup? We can start with this, or we can also set moves as an op, like if we want to, like somebody starts, then does something and and even maybe moves it to somebody else, like throws the ball to somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Pekka, why you added roll in your card. Wouldn't it be useful to also be played in other ways, like maybe as a move? Or do you want to explicitly only restrict it to roll?
Yes, it could be played in other ways. I think this is kind of part of the power, that it's almost like if you're zooming in a infinitely nested realm of possibilities. Like if you put the roll there, then you're kind of underlining, saying, okay, think about this as a roll. And then that's another range of possibilities than without the roll. Like it's not saying this is the better way, but it was like, here I want to think about this as in the type of a roll. It's a little bit like when Mikael was saying, what if we look at the constellation, the boards, as a deck? That's like in putting now this filter of the deck upon them. So, but yeah, like this could be completely open as well. But for now, like I thought, like since I'm playing it as a role, I might as well like put that as a mention. But I don't think it needs that. Like, yeah, you're right on that. It's just like whatever you're emphasizing from the infinite possibilities.
My suggestion, kind of as a lost explorer, would be that, hey, I don't know where I am. I need to see more in order to know where I am. Therefore, I say that I do not want topic in this card before there is more information based on what I can locate what the topic is.
That's already a good move. Like you made an op as a move, like that there cannot be a topic or a title before there is more information. Do you want to pass the move to somebody or let it freely hang out for somebody else?
I would first pass to Pablo.
Good.
As a broken sieve, I let everything that Mikael passes through. I tried to filter, but yeah, I mostly failed.
I make a question to you because I'm interested. Like, is there something left in your broken sieve? Like when you're passing it through, something might be clinging onto it.
Yeah, there's some very faint remnants of doubt.
Okay, yes. So I was thinking of making a move. Now I'm kind of like hanged by technical difficulties because my definite idea was to add another image, but then I have to open the windows again. I will, and I want to make this fairly quickly because otherwise, okay, I'll use that. And then I will add this picture, which you will see in a second, into the board, and it will probably be huge. And the screen sharing will resume just as I upload this. Right. Ta-da, that's big. And it's still uploading. And now the card, I'll leave that. I'll not only leave the frame, but I will bring it to front. So there is a frame within the image. And then I'll put it so. So this is my addition to as a kind of brush expressionist. I'll just and then my move lingers. So my move has ended, but the lingering part of my move, which I maybe keep on doing, is moving this dotted dashed frame around here. So this is a kind of like lingering move that might still be here. And I'll throw the ball back to Pablo and suggest that he passes it to Mikael, even though I don't have the right, but I'm brash. So, but I throw it back to Pablo because I want him to contribute more and find a way that the broken sieve can find more stuff.
I will perform a visual broken sieve operation on the image, trying to filter, mostly failing, but filtering some.
By looking at the image, especially before Pekka cropped it, I would say that, but still I would say that there are kind of as if stairs or something in the background, and also some sort of what is it, kind of not window, but some sort of sheet on the right upper corner, or some reflection or something of a window or something. And there is also one character kind of leaning in to the space. I would say that this card might have something to do about finding spaces inside spaces, or then like finding exits from current places to other places, something like that. So there it may also relate to bridges or windows or portals or what, but like or then just like overlapping spaces or something like that. But there is this sort of like image that or a kind of feature that has somehow to do with either like spaces connecting or then like people connecting to spaces, something like that.
I will brashly take a move and add, how did I think this? Yes. Now I'm doing yellow text. I should probably change it to visibility. It's more fun that way. Okay, so, and I will copy from Mikael, finding spaces. Side spaces via the masked approach to life, to observation. Yes, that's my addition. Once I get out of this box, yes. And it's not a title, so I'm not breaking a rule. It's a point, but it's not a title.
That's great.
Slight adjustment. And I pass it to whomever. We can also do parallel moves. We can change the turn order operation.
I've been doing a parallel move and just pass the image through the broken sieve a couple of times, as you can judge by the results. Maybe you should share the screen, Pekko.
Oh, I'm multitasking. Yes, you're completely right. Good point. Because yeah, and I will now share the screen as just this, so I can do some other computer work in the background to get the images and whatnot. Hopefully, yes. Okay, so now we're good. So
This here is it's more like to do with themes or drives or something like that, but I'm quite not sure what sort of interesting powers, for instance, might emerge if you kind of look at that one card we had earlier. Pekko was presenting, so it would be interesting to find more functionality.
I'm actually making a power now. Power to forge masks and change between them. So,
Cool.
so the masked approach has this power of multi-masked, which is a power to forge masks and to change between them. And then as I will explore this nested functionality, I will make mask as a, what is a mask? Well, mask is, I don't know yet, but because I have in my mind that I want to define it somehow differently. And somehow this image was just an inspiration, and the kind of mask-like things in it kind of open things up. But what if we think of mask differently? So mask is it's creating there. So mask here is like creating artificial countenances. It should be approach. Yes, that's right. So, for example, a new way of seeing or talking can be a mask. So now I can start. It's still not a title, but I can start to see this role. It's a role that constantly generates, well, maybe not constantly, but can generate. Has this power of like maybe I talk like this, and then it takes that as a mask. Like it's almost now I put it on and I keep this, and then when I take it off, it's like a mask still available. And then I come with maybe I look at things like this, and then it's now I have a new mask, and then they might put it on and put it aside. So they treat this sort of changes more mask-like, which makes them switchable or keepable, and that they become this sort of countenance in itself.
Yeah, and now I actually do see how the functioning of this card might also lead into collecting tokens on it, and therefore I think we would be kind of ready to also give this card a name whenever we feel like it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Brashly, you can change it, but I'll put it in my own form. It's like mask with the question mark, masks as tokens. So the masks are tokens that it collects. Which is an interesting thought that it kind of like creates them, but then treats them like, yes, like tokens, which makes them, of course, storable, exchangeable, things like this come to play in it. It's just kind of interesting. And it's also interesting as a power. Maybe I'll put this as a reference because I'm now in this Brash form of expression. Let's see how this works. Maybe this one. Does it work? Yes. I'll make a point here, which is not part of the card. It's a reference to the card, hence the line. Is that this is actually an interesting take on the power. in the sense that power that one is so this idea that there are things that one is already capable of, hence they are not superpowers, they're powers. Like you are capable of creating like new way of speaking, and then you are capable, maybe you need to train it, but you're certainly capable of thinking of, now I put this on like a mask, or now I store it, maybe write it down, or however you store it. So you're capable of all of that, but thinking of it as a power makes it function like a power. Um, like if you put here the power of flight, say, I mean, I guess you could learn to fly, but let's say it's much more limited. But in this sense, that the power is something that is within capabilities and trainabilities, and not impossible. But then starting to do it changes your behavior, and therefore it kind of becomes a power because it expands your capabilities.
Yeah, and actually, it also seems that that these masks and kind of what that power does in terms of like finding spaces.
Mm-hmm.
What you are actually doing is, because you are seeing things in new eyes and hearing things new ways and so on, that must mean then that you are actually finding existing spaces, but you're kind of finding them kind of anew, in a sense, seeing
Yeah,
them in different light or in different filters, and therefore they become new.
yeah, I agree. Yeah, like it's very much like that. Like that they are the sort of potential spaces, potential stances. One could also think, like in terms of human, like stance, how you're standing. Like like from martial arts, you have the stance where you start from, and then you can come up with a new stance, and that stance changes your operative space.
I added a sentence about how masks also change how others perceive you. So it's like different from a filter in the sense that it not only changes your perspective of the world, but the world's perspective on you.
Yes, agreed. Like, and this is also like then almost like a question. It's like a question for this role. Maybe I don't need to write this down because Mikael you were already saying that it could have a title already, but which is true. Like you could already start thinking about that. But the one question to put on it is like, does it actually want that others see these masks? Because it might, or does it want to hide them, or does it not care?
Yeah.
You're muted, Mikael. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just like answering someone here that like 5 minutes and I need to be
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
But that's a really interesting question. Can others see them, or is that the property of a mask that you have to decide?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Um, I will, in my brashness, I will do this in brackets, so it makes it to be kind of optional and changeable. I will make a title for this, but because it's in brackets, it's not enforced. Just give it a little bit of size. It makes more tidily from it. So I called it the multi-masker, but in brackets. Which is then interesting, like, okay, I'll have another point. This is a question. What is there? Two questions. Except and then that's what is the collection of masks like, and are there different collection types? Meaning, like, if there is a multi-masker and it's generating these masks, one way to think about the variety of it is to think how they treat the masks that are generated and how they perceive them, how they store them.
Actually, very, very interesting about this, like creating other kind of. I also see this as a role type of card kind of creating role type other roles, and then also like would be very interesting to try out to kind of think kind of that okay, with role cards I can kind of design other types of cards or something
Yes.
like that, like that kind of in a sense like roles used to kind of expand the somehow the network of or a game or a world or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also like you can use them to create new cards, and you can use them, of course, to play with other cards and their spreads, constellations, scenes, and just also to play with this. What is the card? I made a card around this card. Like, we had this hypothetical card space, but of course one can take all of this as a card and all of this material. Like, if I think of it taking this as a role, and I was thinking, like, I would actually like to have this support material, like this cool picture of circus leader masks. So I just made like a larger card, which is now, maybe this is the multi-masker card. Um, uh, like the whole collection in itself. And I think I could play this, like I could add to it. And it's now an interesting question. What would I add? Like, of course, it can be different for everyone, but like, what would I add here to play? And this opens up this possibility that, say, you start playing a role, um, and you start with, say, a card, but it's actually very likely that you kind of or very possible that you might modify it by filling it, but you also might modify it by changing it, like to better fit, to be a better instrument for you in a way, like you add something to it, or maybe you actually kind of make a deck of it, where the other part of the deck is your mask collection, and you make your own way of storing the masks, and then your deck is that card on top, so to speak, and then the mask collection like underneath that. And that's actually your whole role, for example.
Very interesting. But oh dear, I have to go very soon.
Yes. Let's make final observations and bring this to a close. Any last thoughts on this scene here we have at our hands, or the approaches, anything really?
Let's continue this mask making, this card making icons.
I think, yeah, I think there is this, like said, it clearly opens also this possibility of iteration. Like here, I like people go in different directions. For me, immediately like this, certain ideas open up here, how it approaches the power, the whole idea of multi-masking, this idea of masking, then this card shape, all of this opens up new ideas, and then a new card might evolve, taking parts of it, or maybe a version 2 of multi-masker, multi-mask maker. But both are kind of possibilities, but they're kind of teaching to play with these possibilities, which are huge, but they are kind of bringing this sort of, maybe not the best practices, but better practices. They might not be best practices, the best, but there's practices that one can take from them.
Let's explore more in the coming sessions.
Yes, that's good. And with that, I will go through the ritual of stopping the share, and then I will say goodbye to the potential people, which are always potential.